Well, hello, good afternoon. And Austin and Laura are here with me. And I just got to say, the other day I hit a golf shot. It wasn't a good shot. It's first time out this year. And I said, falchion twiz pipe. And it just didn't have the same effect. And if you want to know what that's about, you missed yesterday.
And then Friday I sailed a forehand long again.
And you didn't say
shit.
Yeah.
And I felt
that
fine.
Feels so much better
fine.
than falchion twiz pipe. And that's what we're going to talk about today on Weekend Hangover. I told Laura where you were going. I'll MC the discovery questions. Hey, good to see everybody today, even though we're not seeing you.
We're that's what I'm talking about, Jason. Seen. What does red mean? I don't know. What does green mean?
I don't know. It's good to have the booth virtual today with us, although we wish she were here in studio with us. Laura, great job this weekend on a painful subject. And just your thoughts now on, are you having a hangover today?
I'm very sleepy. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Into that a little bit, right? You know, oh my gosh, I've got so much. I've been reading on this lately that I have so much more knowledge of that whole dynamic of the 24 hours after you do something stupid, like presume God to people. Yeah. So we're in to the series Christism and Atheism, and framing conversations of what does this look like with Christ? What does this look like without Christ, without God? And this one's about pain. And so we're glad that those of you who are watching, and those of you who are watching on demand later are joining us. I want to say hi to Jordan because she says she always tunes in. And I just want to acknowledge Jordan is with us today. Most likely my daughter, his sister.
She tunes in for Laura. That's
bud. What's that?
Kid ourselves. She tunes in to watch Laura.
She does. She tunes in for Laura, her bud. One of the cool things about being in the same place a long time is, what were the kids in like junior high when you came to Southbrook, Laura?
12 or 13, probably.
They were young.
Yeah, what year was that? 02?
2003.
So yeah, Jordan would have been 13, 14. Austin would have been 12, 13. And it's been neat to see you guys have that relationship all these years. What a blessing to have you in their life. And now we get to do this together. And I'm, months ago I said, hey, Laura, which one of these do you want to take? And you jumped right on the pain one and humanity. And boy, I love that. Your messages always feel like works of art to me, and yesterday was a work of art. So thank you for that. In the midst of some pretty painful times that you've been in for a while, so thank you for that. What are some of your stories around pain? So let's go back to 2 weeks ago. One of my favorite moments in the long history of Weekend Hangover was Laura and Austin sharing some of their scars. Which, by the way, Laura, I'm listening yesterday. When you're talking about sharing scars, how could you not talk about Quint and Hooper and Brody on the Orca in Jaws and the most famous
I don't know if she's seen Jaws.
Laura, have you never seen Jaws?
I think I saw it once, but I did.
No.
When you started saying those names, I thought, I don't know what he's talking about.
Have you celebrated a 4th of July in America?
Oh, you need to come on a family vacation with us, because on July 4th night, we're on the beach watching Jaws, you know. I mean, but that's sounds yeah, it's the same person who mocks Galaxy Quest. So wait a minute now. Don't go there.
I'm sorry.
Don't go there. Don't mock Galaxy Quest. But I'm sitting there going, Quint sharing their scars. That's the USS Indianapolis, Mr. Hooper. Oh gosh. Anyhow, where were we? Oh yeah, scar story. So Laura, scar story. And this one in your groups, people, we want you to talk about your scars. Scar story.
Yeah, I mean, I told a couple of my top ones yesterday. Was the bum knee, and then getting hit in the face.
You still have scars from that? Do you still have scars from the bum knee, the knee?
I do, yeah. I mean, and one of my things was it took me a long time to like try stuff again. So running was a thing for me where I eventually got back into it. But even, there's Archie.
Archie, the star of yesterday's sermon, Archie Buffington.
What's funny is just about this time last year, I with Archie got in a little mix up at the park and broke my finger because a big dog came after my 10-pound dog, and I broke my finger. And it was the first time I've actually broken a bone. I've twisted lots of things and sprained lots of things, but it was the first break of a bone, and it still hurts. It was a funny time to be hurt myself because I had so many things going on last spring. But I remember it forced me to be a little more careful with myself for a little while.
I was going to tell one of my pain stories was similar to that. So I'm playing in an alumni tournament in the 90s, and we're up by 20 with about a minute to go in the game. And I still had to be competitive, and I stick my hand in to try to steal a ball. And Dawes, do you remember my finger went up and back? My middle finger went up and back on my right hand. And I remember a guy at church that I consider a doofus. And I'm telling him this story at church the next day. And I've got it, it's all wrapped and everything. And I tell, here's how it happened. He goes, yep. Did you see how God's trying to tell you that you're way too competitive? Respect it all. And remember when Balaam's donkey said, why are you hitting me these times? And it was a jackass telling me exactly what I needed to hear. And to this day, it's when the weather's bad, this finger, it literally went up and back. It was the weirdest thing.
Breaking a bone's surreal. I mean, because it's so
weird.
unnatural.
Yeah, it just gets displaced. So that was mine. Yours mine was hyper. We're up 20, literally with less than a minute to go. And I still had to be showing everyone what a great competitor I was. I had to show it. I just had to. And, we're going to get into this in a minute, but God whispers to us in our pleasures. He shouts to us in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse the deaf world. The whole deal with that with C.S. Lewis. He does sometimes, and he uses jackasses to say what we need to hear in our pain sometimes. It was for noble purposes. See, you're saving Archie. That's noble, but me, not noble purposes. Austin, give us another scar story, because I said after 2 weeks ago with Austin and Laura sharing their church stories that they need to write a book called Church Stitches. Funny, and it would be about surviving church as a kid.
Yeah.
Give us, she had another one. Give us another.
Yeah, well, I had, two things came to mind that have, I suppose, some nice application or learning from them. But the first one was I have a big scar, kind of a gross looking scar on my shin, my right shin. And in the summer as a kid, under the age of 10, certainly, and my bike pedal, which was metal, and had these little spikes on it. I hit my pedals down, and my foot slipped off, and it came around and just sliced in my shin. Pain. I don't feel ouch or hurt. In my mind, I just feel mad. But I was so mad because I knew I'd the doctor for stitches a lot as a kid. And I was so mad. So I went into the hose and I washed it off. Finally got to stop bleeding. And I went inside and I got a baseball sock and I pulled it up over my leg. And and left it there for a few days.
Hmm.
And it became terribly infected. And had all these sorts of stitches and just nasty. When a huge cut gets infected because you haven't cleaned it and you probably didn't shower for a couple days either. It was summer and everything on the dirt, and got terribly infected. And so, if you don't transform one's pain, you'll transmit it, or it'll transform you, and it'll form you, and it'll get worse. And I certainly learned that you have to treat it when you get it.
Yeah.
And then the other one I had shared earlier with you guys was the time I broke my arm, around the same age probably, and it was broken all the way except for a little hairline.
Did you have careless, negligent parents?
You guys were always busy. Always
see you, son. Have a good day.
But I broke my arm, and there was a little hairline part that wasn't broken quite all the way. And so for it to heal right, the doctor said, we're gonna have to fracture. We're gonna have to break your arm the rest of the way. This is my bone right here, the radius. And so they handed me a towel and said, bite down on this. And they took my wrist and snapped it. And that for me, though, has just, when I think of pain, when I sit and listen to you yesterday, Laura, just the subject is just present. I always just, my body remembered. This tidal wave is about to come. I have a feeling of what it's going to be, but I don't know exactly what it's going to be. But I know this, I can feel the current moving, and something's about to hit, and it's that moment of biting down on that towel.
I remember that moment, and it was a case of, as a parent, watching that.
Mm-hmm.
This is more painful for mom. A whole lot more than it's going to hurt you. No, that wasn't true, but it did hurt as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that gets into then the next question that we want to talk about: is pain ever force you to pay attention to your life or to God in a new way? And this gets hardship is discipline. God is treating you as sons and daughters. If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're illegitimate children and not true sons and daughters. And so that passage in Hebrews 12 gets into some level of God is possibly the author of some of our pain. Sometimes it certainly implies that. How do ye think regarding that, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I want to be really delicate talking about this yesterday, is that I can say those things that happened to me in the 8th grade changed my life, like hurting my knee and not being able to do all the things that had defined me as a kid changed my life. And the same can be true of, I told you guys that in college I had a pretty major depressive episode, and I'm a different person because of that, and I'll be a different person because of the last 3 years. So whether or not God made them happen is a whole question. And it's one
but that's not, question's not relevant to you, is it?
Yeah,
really?
Because for me, I've sat with that question. I've wrestled with it. I've read the books on it. I've had semi-good answers to it. I've had things but they wasn't useful. It wasn't helpful. And particularly when my sister got sick, I was in seminary wrestling with those questions all day long, reading the experts on those questions. It didn't make the day any easier. It didn't make her sickness any easier. The hows are what got me through. The whys, even when they were solid, didn't get me through. And so even whether the answer is that God gives those things, makes those things, allows those things, that doesn't make it easier to make it through them. If God is not a part of it and it's because of freedom, that doesn't make it easier. The only thing that for me, the only thing that has gotten me through the painful stuff is having God with me as my how. Mm-hmm. And that's with it, whatever end of the spectrum you land on that question of God being the author or being the one who allows it, or God being out of the picture of it. The whys have not been useful to me. I think they can be to some people, but they have not been helpful to me.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever met anyone that the whys really helped them, though. That's what I loved about what you said about that. And I think I told you earlier, I told Oz earlier, I think the sermon in a sentence yesterday was God not necessarily is going to provide a why, but he always provides how. Oh, I thought that was the sermon in a sentence.
I do want to say, just to that Hebrews passage, I think we're transformed by asking the question. So,
Yeah.
I would never want to disregard anybody prodding into that, like looking into that, asking questions around it, because we're formed by asking it. And I say that as somebody who got the luxury of doing it in school and with good teachers. So
yeah, and I love that. So that implication of endure hardship as discipline, not punishment. So the implication of that statement is, I have the potential here in how I view this adversity and this pain. I'm going to view it as God's going to use it. He's not going to waste it. And I don't need to know whether it's intentional or not.
We didn't get to it totally, but it is always an invitation, right? Whether it comes from God or not, it's always an invitation.
And I would tell the listeners this, to that point. I just went through a really painful episode, just, and as unjust as it seemed to me, the reality is there's some things I needed to hear in that I would say God was disciplining me, but that's not a negative word. When we talk about discipline, he's forming, he's forging. And we tend to look at the word discipline negatively, right? We tend to look at that as God's mad. And that's not at all the implication there at all. He's just not done with us yet. When has pain forced you to pay attention? Because that's the big thing. A lot of that skimmed when things were good, and they repented when things were tough, right? There's a real simple formula you see with them. Not that life's formulaic with this, but Laz, I want to hear your point on that. When has pain forced you to pay attention to God or your life in a new way? When do you see that have happening and the scales fell off in a deeper way?
Well, from like a more temporal sense, one's ethic is wrong, so there's consequences to that in life, and one's circumstances are going to be evident. You're living poorly, you're making poor decisions, and the divine law of life, there was a rebound effect from that, and that the wisdom literature is all about. But then why I think loss and death is so particularly hard is because there's not an ethic necessarily within that. Peter, in the other famous passage other than Romans 5, probably in the New Testament, on suffering, and 1 Peter 4, he distinguishes from suffering within our lives today, in ourselves, in our God, when loss and death happens. And so I think maybe on some kind of lesser level of that, where that intersection of that spiritual suffering happens, is in a spiritual death, whether voluntarily or accidentally. But I do know this from the spiritual deaths. I found this to be true, and it's difficult to find it to be true, but I think we're getting into it today in the hows we're talking about. And that is that the Lord does let us down easy when it happens. I think I think he's merciful. Now, I won't talk to the lost death, that kind of spiritual death. But when those around us die and we have this loss in our soul. But when it comes to, there are parts of us that need to die off, and we need to die daily too, as Paul would say. It's very difficult to ask for patience, or it's very difficult to ask for humility. Those are really terrifying prayers. But when you can pray for them, and I for myself, and having gone through an intense season of that not long ago, of learning the craft and the gift, and receiving the craft and the gift of humility, and trying to begin my life of really stepping into what that means as a follower of one who sacrificed himself to surrender. I knew at the end of that prayer, not just at the beginning or throughout the prayer, it came in the behalf of others. not just myself, in privacy. At the end of that prayer, I learned that his grace really is sufficient, and he does let us down easy. And and there is love at the end of it. Because love chooses us. We're not chosen. We're not worthy of his love. I don't. We're not. Love chooses us, and we find that love at the end. And so I will say that, and that's what I learned from it.
Yeah, I've been in a season where I've been meditating on 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul says, "I delight in insults," because this year's had plenty of those. From you're faithless to you're evil. And so what does that mean, to delight in the pain of being just insulted? So ditto. Yesterday, Laura referenced 1 Kings 17, 18, 19, and the story of Elijah defeating the prophets of Baal and Ashtoreth and Jezebel and etc. And then he goes into the cave of, beyond despondency, there is a depression that says, "Take my life, Lord. I'm no better than my ancestors. I just want to die. I want to go to sleep and die." And so the question, because a lot of pain in life is about the perspective we're in right now. A lot of people are in pain and they don't know why. I talked to a sister of mine who lives in Portland the other night, and she just can't understand why she's in so much pain with regard to the whole COVID situation. I don't understand. And so there are a lot of people finding themselves in the cave right now. Why do you imagine that Elijah went from such a high to such a painful low that he wanted to just not live?
Yeah, I think there could be lots of reasons, but one of the things that's interesting to me is we tend to not, it's like a reverse reading, like reading with what we know now about trauma. There's a good chance that that's what Elijah is experiencing, is the effects on your brain and your nervous system of a very dramatic thing happening. Because buried in that story is this military victory, right, where he slays all these people. And as much as we read that as a victory, it's not without consequences. And just he's so alone at the beginning of the story. I remember learning the story as a kid, and it's so noble that he stands up to everybody. And they would tell us, stand up to people in your school and stand up for what's right. And it's this noble thing to be by yourself. And I think he feels that pressure of being by himself. That's why Elisha is such a gift to him, because he finally has somebody else to carry the mantle with him. And the more we're learning about trauma, I told you guys what I learned last week from my counselor was that whether you're on a battlefield or in a living room or in an office space, your brain recognizes being on alert. And that most of us over this last year, our nervous system has had to be on higher alert. And so I think one of the things why Elijah is such a big deal to us is it reveals all these things that scientists are just now figuring out about how our brains work and how it responds to giant things and what it needs to recover from those things. And so we see he's getting what we know now about rest and nourishment and silence and all those things. He gets those in the story. And so maybe we need all those things too.
Yeah. I love that. So let's, because that was your how yesterday, which was so practical.
Here's a huge curveball. Okay, I'm thinking of this. We didn't talk about this at all, but I want to throw it out there because it's totally unprepared. Speaking of our how, it's within this arena, and we climb to the mountain of knowledge, and we find the Bible there, as we're saying here. There's an abundance of people being restored in the scriptures, of a community, of a people, of these bare necessities of life, but especially of a community. We talked about how in Job, he's really kind of restored by this community in chapter 42 after all of his suffering. In baptism, one of the powers of being baptized and being cleansed in front of the people is you're admitting your deficiency, one's deficiency and inadequacy in front of people, and they're accepting you despite it. I mean, that's part of the very real power of being baptized in front of the church, in front of a community. there's a huge discrepancy in the New Testament or anywhere really in the scriptures of one-on-one counseling. And it seems to be that when one has a pain or a secret, those things tend not to, within the laws of life, do well the more secret and private they are. They tend to be freed amongst a community when pain is shared. The more, the better. So I don't know what my question really is there, but the New Testament really doesn't talk about one-on-one counseling at all. It almost exclusively talks about communal counseling, comforting.
Well, I think it is.
What do you do with that?
I'll jump in on that. Like that, I've read a lot of people who say self-care is not the end goal. The end goal is actually other care, like is having your needs met by other people. And I think that's another place where the scripture is ahead of us, is saying you should belong to a community. One of the reasons counseling is necessary right now is because I don't think we have a rich enough picture of what friendship is supposed to be. So there is, I think, sometimes a need for expertise for somebody who has studied trauma, for somebody who studied addiction. So I think counseling meets a certain need there. But I would also say it also is rising now because I think our friendship skills are lacking.
Yeah.
And our ability to build a community of support is lacking. And so I think that is what church ideally could be. And I think that's, that's on the list of like ways scripture was ahead of the game. You look at Acts where they say nobody had any need. That's because everybody was already there to meet it. They were already in place with the meals and support and providing silence for each other. They were already providing all those things. So self-care is like a step towards that. But the idea of self-care, I think, would be to be then actively making room for everybody else to also take care of each other.
The picture, and you guys probably remember if I bring this up, the picture that I've used to describe what's a healthy, functional person in community is, remember, the 3 stages of development are dependence, independence, interdependence. And so dependence, when you're little, you're dependent upon your parents. Independence is where you start differentiating, is the psychological terms, to find out your own sufficiency. But that's not maturity. Maturity is interdependence, where we can be mutually giving and receiving, loving and being loved. That's maturity. What happens with people is they get stuck emotionally and they go to what I termed woe dependence. And that is, I'm way too dependent on other people for my well-being or my own self. And the picture, remember, in Galatians 6 is you carry your own backpack and you help each other carry each other's boulders. That's, to me, that's health, is when I know I can pack my own backpack to be ready to help other people carry their boulders. And all the counseling in the world, until it's put into practice where you're able to be a boulder sharer, it's not, just because you got to a place where you're able to handle your own backpack, that's not the game. The game is, in life, I have the resources that I'm able to help other people carry their boulders, the things that nobody can carry alone. And that's healthy. But we are such a culture that is stunted emotionally. We don't know how to do that. I would qualify that. Agree, Laura, that it's a lack of skill. It's a lack of friendship skill. We've lost the art of boulder sharing and backpack carrying. Like, where there's some stuff I gotta carry that's mine. It's not anybody else's. It's mine. I gotta do the things in the cave with God that only I can do. What have you found helpful when life is painful? And this is the last question. We have a few minutes on this. Told you guys quiet. I've learned to sit in my pain, to experience it. Don't numb it. So let me give a parenthetical thing here. I think the number one thing parents teach their kids is how to manage pain. I think it's the most important thing. It's why kids today don't seem to be able to function with adversity, is they're not taught how to be managers of their pain. It's not a bad thing all the time, et cetera. So that for me is You know, if your kid always wants to numb their pain by being on a device for 2 hours, they're putting off their pain. They're not numbing their pain. They're just putting it off for 2 hours is what they're doing. The pain they experience in school, if they come home, they're on a device for 2 hours, they've just avoided their pain, but it's going to still be there when they're done playing with the device. What's helpful for Laura Buffington and then what's helpful for Austin McMahon on this? Laura, you go next, and someone's going to identify with what you say, just like somebody just identified with what I said.
Yeah, I would. I like your answer because I would agree to quiet. I would add my name on the quiet list if that has been useful. Also for me is this didn't come up, but just making lists. I'm not somebody who journals because I do too much writing. So actually writing is not very useful to me. But one of the more useful things to me is to just make a list. Like there are all kind of topics that it might be, but it might just be like, this is the thing causing me pain right now, or this is the thing I need. Or one thing I did when I first moved back to Columbus to help my parents is I made lists of ways to love my mom and ways to love my dad. And I just made lists. And something about like having the pen in my hand and writing it down and like doing that, like pour out on paper has been really useful to me through this. And I think it's the kind of thing that other people would turn into like journaling or whatever, but journaling is you have to think too much for that for me sometimes. Sometimes it is just like making a big long list about something has been a practice that I have kept at for a while.
That's
and then
good.
I would
I
also
love
just
that.
say other people. I mean, I would echo
Yeah,
Austin's
yeah.
thing about community too.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to say something there that at some point you have to come out of your solitude into support. I don't want to leave it that if I just get quiet, right, that does me. That allows me to face it, and then at some point I have to share it. Usually it's with
Yeah.
when I'm dealing with something.
What the silence
painful.
does, and this goes into mine, is you're allowing time to acknowledge and accept the circumstance. I think that's really what the silence is. You're getting rid of the distractions, and you're acknowledging and accepting what reality is. I think one of the things I snap at my son most often. I don't want to think it through, but I think there's some truth to it, which is good when you snap impulsively, and there's some truth that kind of falls out. But that it is he doesn't have the so many more areas than that, better ways, but I you're alive because you don't feel when you're dead. You're alive.
Yeah.
More of a too much of a self-masochistic level. I've always thought it would be interesting to stitch oneself. I think for me it's maybe more theoretical than practical, like making lists. But the first thing that comes to mind for me is that accepting of pain, because it means I'm alive, and there is such an invigorating feeling of the pain out in the run. And as I said earlier, the moments before a marathon or an ultra marathon of starting to live into that pain, not being positive, not being happy-go-lucky, but getting ready. Maybe it's a flashback of the breaking of the arm, but getting ready to go into the pain cave and just knowing what's to come, and accepting that, and potentially that's what the cussing is about, the swearing is about. You're just acknowledging the reality that's around you. This sucks. This hurts. Yeah.
Do you think Jesus had Fouch and Twizz pipe on the cross?
Psalm 22 is certainly a GD.
Well, and I do think that when Paul says in Philippians 3, I want to be like him in his death, it is you can't beat a person who chose to do what he did. You can't beat that. You can't beat him. They're like, he's going to beat everything. He just embraced that, the pain of the cross, the separation. And it's weird because you don't want to be masochistic, but on the other hand, it's nothing can beat the person who can manage pain in a redemptive way. And it really is life. Like you mentioned, the Buddhists, Laura, they begin with the premise life is suffering, and that's true.
That's why perhaps why it's so hard, as we all know, to to make the Bible make sense, to make Christ as an idea and as a person and as a practice to make sense to the Western world, certainly upper class Western world, is because, as we talked about, the notion that life is supposed to be comfortable.
Mhm.
And when it's not, what is going on? Why
What's
isn't it
wrong?
comfortable?
Yeah.
And the central element of all of this, practice, person, and an idea, is to suffer. And not just to suffer, but to choose suffering over anything else. That's a whole
Well,
other ballgame.
remember when Paul shares the testimony, when God picked him, he goes, I'm going to show him how much he must succeed for my name. That's not what he said. He said, I'm going to show him how much he must suffer for my name.
I die
Wow.
daily.
Well, Fouch and Twizpipe, we're over on time. I got one more thing, Oz, right here. You know what that is? Mary Lou Moffat. She broke my heart. And Laura, if you don't know what that is, oh my gosh, have you missed out on life? Oh my God.
Is that a movie?
Buffy,
Is that a movie? I don't.
you're going to sit down with me and we're going to watch Jaws.
We'll live Facebook it. That should be an episode of Weekend Hangover. It's just us live watching Jaws.
And watch me not get too upset. Next week, morality. If there is no God, is there a moral objective? And if there is a God, whose morals are right and whose are wrong? And we're going to talk about that next week on Weekend Hangover.